Wow!
Hello, I'm Sarah Pate, Director of the Washington Center for the Book, an affiliate of the Library of Congress Center for the Book, administered by Washington State Library, where I'm a librarian. The Centers for the Book help carry out the mission of the National Center, which is to promote books, reading, libraries, and literacy nationwide. We also promote our state's literary heritage by putting a focus on books and authors with a connection to our states. Each year, as part of our participation in the Library of Congress National Book Festival's Roadmap to Reading, we each choose books with a local connection to represent our states. This is part of the Great Reads from Great Places initiative. Today, we are speaking with Great Reads authors from several states. They were invited by the affiliate centers of the book for California, Hawaii, Idaho, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington. It's my great pleasure to introduce today's authors to you, alphabetically by the name of the state they are representing today. Representing California, Wake Sleepy One, California Poppies, and the Super Bloom. Lisa Kerr grew up hiking and exploring the Western United States. She is a children's book author, playwright, educator, and essayist whose work has been featured in magazines and publications, including Huffington Post, New York Magazine, Bustle, and more. Lisa Braun is a graphic designer, illustrator, surface pattern designer, and watercolorist using digital and traditional media. She draws inspiration from many of her illustrations while hiking. She resides in Dresher, Pennsylvania. Representing Hawaii, Kapaiamahu. Daniel Haymore and Joe Wilson, co-authors with Hinalei Moana Wankalu and illustrator Daniel Souza of Kapaiamahu, are writers, researchers, filmmakers, and activists living in Hawaii. They are dedicated to telling stories that emanate from the voices of those on the outside, that inspire creativity, that incite us to abandon our comfortable role as spectators and compel us to question and to act. Representing Idaho, The Bright Side. Chad Otis is an author and illustrator of children's books. Most recently, his book, The Bright Side, earned several starred reviews, and his book, A Little Fairy Tale, was an Amazon editor's pick and a bestseller at Barnes & Noble. He lives on the edge of the Rocky Mountains in Idaho. Representing Nevada, Nudie Gill, Poison Powerhouse of the Sea. Bonnie Kelso is the author and illustrator of Nudie Gill, Poison Powerhouse of the Sea, the first informational fiction picture book all about nudibranchs. Bonnie is a huge fan of the ocean and everything in it, except for the pollution. She has 3 more humorous and educational ocean-themed picture books releasing in 2024 and 2025, titled Sea Smiles, Sleepy Sea, and Sea Suds. Representing Oregon, Little Monarchs. Jonathan Case is an illustrator and author whose work includes 8 graphic novels. His latest and most ambitious work to date is Little Monarchs, a 2023 Eisner nominee that Kirkus Review calls superbly written and illustrated. And finally, representing Washington, Maurice. Jessica Bagley grew up in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, where she developed a love of hamburgers, drawing, and anthropomorphic food. Her picture book Laundry Day was a Junior Library Guild selection and received a 2018 Ezra Jack Keats Honor Award for writing. She lives in Seattle, Washington. Thank you all so much for your incredible books and for being here with us today. Can you share with us what inspired you to write your book? Why was it important to you to tell this story? Lisa Kerr, will you start?
Sure, thank you. So my book is about the California poppy, and it's representing California. My family and I took a hiking trip out to the Antelope Valley California Poppy Reserve, and we were just surrounded by hill after hill of blooming poppies. And it was one of the most incredible experiences ever. And it's interesting because I was writing picture books about all kinds of other subjects, and I didn't think I was going to delve into nonfiction, but I had to. I learned a few little things about the poppy that day during that trip, and the book was born.
Thank you. Lisa Braun?
I've always loved illustrating flowers. I'm a watercolorist, and I started out doing landscapes and then getting into flowers. And I became interested in children's illustration, something I always wanted to do. This is my first book. And this was such a great opportunity, great experience working with Lisa and West Margin Press. And it was so much fun to just have the luxury of just drawing all kinds of flowers, and the animals too, I enjoyed.
Thank you. Dean?
Well, Kapai Mahu actually started 10 years ago when Joe, my partner and husband, and I were making a film about Kumukina, who is a Hawaiian cultural icon and an educator, and who also happens to be Mahu, which is the Hawaiian word for transgender. And we were filming her down in Waikiki Beach, and she turned to these stones and started chanting. And we asked, well, what's so cool about these stones? And she told us the story that they represented the spirits of 4 healers who brought healing arts to Hawaii. And that part of the reason they were such powerful healers was because they also were Mahu. They were more than just a man, more than just a woman, they were both. And that gave them these special powers. So we thought, wow, that's a cool story. I haven't heard a story like that before. What really fascinated us was that when we read the plaque at the stones, it didn't say anything about them being Mahu. So being curious people, we thought that would be an interesting story to research and then to tell the world. And we actually started by making an animated film about it, which was great and was a very popular film. But we thought, you know, there's something about a book that's so special, something that parents can read to children and kids can hold. That's what led us to make this illustrated book about Kapai Mahu.
Thank you. Joe?
You know, the only thing I would add to that story of how Kapai Mahu became a project of ours, and more importantly, a book for children, is the magic of working with an illustrator and an artist like Daniel Sosa, who is a great maker of animated films, who worked with us to first bring the story alive as an animated short. But it was really his brilliance as a storyteller that introduced the character of a young boy or a young child in the film as the person who carries the story along. And that, I think, really seeing the way audiences responded to it as a film told us that it would be really also an important thing to do to bring it alive as a book that children can read on their own, or educators and parents can read with them.
Thank you. Chad?
Hi, thanks, Sarah. So I use visuals a lot, just to remind people this is the book, The Bright Side, that I wrote and illustrated. And the inspiration for this was pretty easy for me because it's based on my life story, my formative years of living in a school bus for about 4 years before I went to a school with other kids in 3rd grade. And I have more visuals that show these to kids when I read the book. That's us outside the school bus after my dad attached a VW van to the top of it, and us outside of the school bus some more. But the inspiration for it, I had it on my bio on my website, and I think it was by the third editor who said, you know, we don't have any illustration work that fits that need right now, but if he ever does anything with that school bus story, we want to hear it. And I was like, yeah, I should probably do something with that. And I always thought, you know, how do you tell that story about housing and food insecurity and that sort of thing? So I had kind of not done that. So I just dove into it, and you know, it was actually one of the easier books I've written. So that was my motivation for it. And you know, it also seemed like the right time in this, you know, this climate, the social climate we have, where people are more accepting of that and more willing to hear the message. So yeah, that's really kind of what kicked that off and got me to do it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bonnie?
Hi, Sarah. Yeah, so my book is Nudie-Gill. It's all about nudibranchs, and you might find that weird that a person who lives in the middle of the desert is writing so many sea-based picture books. But, you know, when I look around the desert here, I see what used to be here, because, you know, billions of years ago, this was a shallow sea. And a lot of these, you know, nudibranchs are the descendants of some of the creatures that you find buried in our limestone mountains around here. So I like to mention that when I talk to kids about nudibranchs. But yeah, nudibranchs have always been my favorite animal in the whole wide world. I love diving and snorkeling. And so when I went to look to see if there were any picture books about them, I noticed that there really weren't. There were a couple of nonfiction ones, but nothing that could really like hook kids in and sort of show them how cool these animals are. So I'm hoping to make a whole new generation of nudibranch lovers with this book.
Nice. Jonathan?
I, about 13 years ago, was thinking about having kids. My wife and I had made the decision to have kids, and I was completely terrified because I was a writer and an artist, and I have no practical skills, just had no practical skills then. So I thought, how am I going to get the dad skills? What if I wrote a book about essentially inviting myself to go play outside again, learn about the world, you know, the real world. Writers and artists tend to be really good at filtering through, you know, other people's work, other media. And I'd been doing that for years and years. So I took a trip and gathered reference and research on the monarch butterflies, and I captured all the different locations that I went on that trip, took compass settings and coordinates. So now when you read the book, whether you're my kid or whether you're somebody else's kid, you have a pathway to go out into that real world experience. You have an invitation through characters and narrative, you know, a children's adventure, but something that's really saturated with reality. So I'm a dad now. My kids are like 12 and about to turn 6. And then I have a boy that I lost while I was making the book. So I've gone through the whole parent experience in the process. And last year we got to, my 2 girls and my wife and I got to do the book tour together, kind of revisiting a lot of those same places. So it's all turned out.
Thank you. Jessica?
Hi, thanks, Sarah. My book, Maurice, is about a dog who is an accordion busker in Paris. And while I don't know any dogs that play accordion, I did actually meet a music box maker when my husband and I went to Paris for our honeymoon years ago. And I always wanted to write a story about him. And unfortunately for me, around the time that I was trying to write this story, The Invention of Hugo Cabret came out by Brian Selznick. And I was like, I really can't see like a lot of ways into this story that I'm trying to write. It was just Hugo Cabret was like really right there. So I always still wanted to revisit this story about, you know, somebody that is maybe making things or doing things that have sort of like a vintage artistry to them. And so I remember one of the times, one of the moments when we met Maurice, the real human person, he showed me this little music box that had like a bird in it that chirped. And there is this connection in Maurice to birds, and birds are his muse. And so basically it's kind of like the inspiration for the book is from a real person creating this story around sort of almost like lost art forms a little bit, and this sort of homage and love of Paris. And so also while I was working on the book, unfortunately it was during COVID, so I couldn't go to take a trip to be there to like take pictures and do like a proper research trip. I still sort of like wandered the streets of Paris using Google Street Views. And so all of the places that are in the book are real places that are in Paris. And so it's really this homage, you know, to this person, to this place. And it's really also a story about sort of connecting with the things that help you create art and your sort of muses and that sort of experience. So
Thank you. Okay, my next question for everyone. The National Book Festival's theme this year is Everyone Has a Story. What does that theme mean to you? Lisa?
Sure. I think this is a really interesting question, and it's one I've answered a couple of times because one of the reasons I'm a writer is because I dealt with this sort of struggle that I think a lot of writers struggle with. Like, am I a real writer? Do I have a story? What makes me different than the tens of thousands of other people in the world who are also writing? And we all have the same goals, right? So I think what's interesting about this book, Wake Sleepy One, is that it's sort of born out of place and out of location. And that's been really important to me because where I'm from is probably one of the most desolate, dry, barren, ugly places in California. And it's been this really interesting paradox because it's made me look at tiny things. It's made me look at the ground or dig into the anatomy of a rabbit or look at adaptations and really be curious about the world around me. And that was sort of the impetus of the book. And during the creation of it, you know, it was going outside and it was doing all this research, but it was also kind of going back to some of my formative years in writing where I had a mentor in college tell me that, you know, you can do this, because I was complaining to her, like, all the major authors out there are from New York or they're writing about New York. Who cares about this tiny little place in California? And what she did is she actually pulled the name of a poet laureate who was from a little place called Pumpkin Center, which is down the road from me. And it's very desolate and it's even smaller than where I'm from. And she sort of talked to me about her career. And, you know, she just sort of made those parallels in a way that I thought, okay, this is interesting. Maybe I can even take the place I'm from and really put that into my stories, put it into my work in a way that it hasn't necessarily been represented before in the literary landscape, and kind of just push that forward and see what happens.
Nice. Thank you. Lisa Braun?
Well, I'm not from California. I'm actually originally from the New York area, but my husband is from California, and I first became exposed to it through him. And now I have cousins that live there and my son lives there. And so I've been from north to south and have seen so many different aspects of California, the landscape, which is so beautiful, it's so interesting, it's so varied. So it's been a great experience. I kind of missed the super bloom this year. I came too early one part of the year and then just came back, and it was a little bit late, but up on the Mendocino coast, there were still, because I guess it's pretty cool up there still, there was still a lot of wildflowers and poppies blooming. So I did kind of see some of the super bloom, and so that's been a great experience.
Thank you. Dean?
I think this is a really great question, because for a story like Kapai-Mahu, it raises the query, yes, everybody has a story to tell, but whose stories get to be heard? Whose stories get to be passed on and heard by other people? So the story of Kapai-Mahu was passed on orally for centuries and centuries before Westerners even came to Hawaii. And it was still known at the turn of the 20th century because it was actually known to Queen Liliuokalani, the last person who ruled Hawaii. And fortunately, she had a family member pass it on to an English language publisher who published the first version of the story. And we found that manuscript. But as time went on, of course, Hawaii changed. Hawaiians became a less and less part of the population. Hawaiian ideas, Hawaiian language were all very thoroughly suppressed. And so when we get to the present era, in 1960s, when the stones were recovered and placed on the ground in full view, the story got suppressed, it got hidden. And although parts of it were told about these healers, the part about them being of dual male and female spirit was completely lost. And so we ended up with a monument called Kapai Mahu, meaning the row of Mahu. But if you look at the sign, it doesn't even mention that they were Mahu. It'd be like having a monument to Japanese war heroes that fought for the United States and kind of forgetting to mention that they were Japanese. It obviously doesn't make sense. So this whole effort that we've been involved in is really at reviving a story that was once told freely, and that's an important story for people to hear, but that needed to be revived in order to be spoken. And we're obviously not Hawaiian, but we were very fortunate to work with a Hawaiian who is intimately tied to the story and help her tell that story through this book.
Thank you, Dean. Joe?
Yes, just a little addition to that would be, as Dean mentioned, in our work on Kapai Mahu and other projects here in Hawaii, we focus on issues of gender and sexuality. And why the theme of this year of Everyone Has a Story, I think, is really important and actually very timely, is for someone like me who came of age in the 70s and 80s. I never had the privilege of seeing someone like myself, a young gay kid trying to figure out where you fit in the world, seeing myself or stories about people like me in literature and popular culture in any way. And we have dedicated our work, at least, to focusing on voices of people, you know, who are marginalized and who do have stories and whose stories do deserve and need to be seen and heard. So I think a theme like this year in particular, when states across the continent are looking to further marginalize and stigmatize LGBTQ queer folks, this theme is essential.
Thank you, Joe. Chad?
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, Everyone Has a Story is, I spend probably more time than I should in self-reflection and thinking about my formative years, and, you know, making books is obviously drives me in that direction. And with Brightside being, you know, pretty personal to me, it did that even more. And I actually have learned a lot about housing and food insecurity since making the book, because I hear from people, I've researched it, and you know, it's another topic that's actually pretty timely right now. And to I read, and I have the sources for this somewhere, that that housing and food insecurity have grown over 70% in the last decade. There are more kids now car hopping, sleeping on couches, sleeping in you know, community centers. So having this story out there and telling this sort of story, even though it's a little bit harder story for some kids to hear, the audience, unfortunately, is kind of bigger than it ever has been. So there will be, you know, many audiences for this, and have been many audiences for this, where, you know, the kids who are actually going through challenges like this get to see themselves in this story, and I get to tell their story a little bit. And then, you know, the kids who aren't having these challenges, who are lucky enough to, you know, have everything they need, can have some empathy for these kids who they see showing up in the same clothes every day like I did, and asking if, you know, are you finished with your lunch? Could I have that when it's done? Or, you know, a lot of kids too get their lunches and sometimes breakfasts and take home food from school. So yeah, for me, you know, in addition to just kind of that self-reflection and thinking about my formative years and trying to relate to kids who have challenges in their formative years, to try to make them feel like they're not alone, and you know, there's, you know, things will get better and there's help out there for them. That's what that meant for me. Everyone Has a Story.
Thanks, Chad. Bonnie?
Great. Yeah, everyone does have a story, even a tiny nudibranch. One of the reasons I am so enamored with them is they really are important to humans. they're being studied by scientists who are researching things like Alzheimer's and cancer treatments because of the interesting way these sea slugs are formed, like the way their brains are composed. Even though, you know, we separated from them like billions of years ago, there are still things that are similar in their brains to ours. And that is just one of the interesting things that scientists are studying about them. They're also like a good indicator of healthy ecosystems. And so like the effects of climate change on them are studied as well. As far as me telling their story, my background is in exhibit design, and I'm used to taking complicated information and synthesizing it down into something that's easy to understand and, you know, easily digestible. So I think that's what's drawn me to creating children's books. It's always been something I wanted to try. And then the other thing I was thinking was like, okay, so Gil, he's fancy and flashy. He's a bit of an exhibitionist. So why not have his story come from Las Vegas, right?
Nice. Thank you. Jonathan?
So on the topic of everybody has a story, I think that sometimes stories find us. That was the case for me with Little Monarchs. All I knew in the beginning was that I wanted to do this book that would give me a reason to go outside into, you know, real geography and to try to map that into a character narrative. But as I learned about monarchs, I learned that they take, you know, 4 generations to complete one migratory cycle. And that the reason that they're so important in the Day of the Dead is that because by the time they get like 3,000 miles away in the north, and then they come back and they arrive November 1st or 2nd, that generation that lives 8 times as long as any of the other 3 generations of monarchs, that generation has never seen the origin point. It's never come home before. And so there's this connection between generations, between our losses, between all these things that ended up really affecting my family at a kind of a core level with the loss of my son, and working through this book where I was trying to sort through reality and fantasy and meaning making. Sometimes that all just sort of comes together and you don't really see or understand it in the beginning. You know, the book or the story sort of finds you. But my hope, I guess, for all of our books, and it sounds like a lot of us are on the same page, is, you know, we put these things out to people and we sort of want them to find their own story, and use us as sort of a jumping off point, maybe. You know, maybe you go to that place in Paris that you were talking about. Maybe you find the hot springs or the monarch groves and you make your own story from the jumping off point of somebody else's.
Thank you. Jessica?
Yeah, a lot of the similar sentiments that everyone was saying, you know, like I tend to make stories that are really inspired by my life and my lived experiences, and I try to find you know, a way in that might be a little more accessible to have other people, you know, find themselves in the story. So I tend to do that with my work a lot, and I find that that's, you know, a way that we all connect, right? We all connect through stories. And if somebody can see themselves in your story, then they're going to connect to you, and then you're going to connect to them. And it's sort of this like cycle of healing. You know, it makes us feel less alone, like some of us were saying. And it's very interesting because I also feel like Maurice is a different story than I have told before, because it seems a little bit more sort of timeless, sort of classic in the sort of style in which I told it. It's very pulled back from like my personal lived experience, but something that did happen in the creation of the book that is very much my story is I sort of had an existential crisis making the book, you know, about this character that was having an existential crisis about like how to make his artwork. And that happens a lot, like when you make a story, just like Jonathan was saying, like you find yourself, the story finds you, there's this sort of like strange experience that happens where sometimes you don't know where you are in the story or why you needed to make it until it's done or until it presents itself to you. And this book allowed me to sort of go through my own sort of, you know, change as an artist. I gave myself permission to abandon the artwork about a quarter of the way in and start over and actually make the kind of book visually that I was hoping I would make. And so it really is a story about sort of like, you know, when everything seems lost, you can still find your creativity, your heart. You can still find that inspiration either from inside of you or outside of you. So it all very much ties together in telling our own stories.
Thank you. Okay, our final question for everyone is what is one of your favorite things about your state? And we'll start with Lisa again.
Great. Obviously the California poppy and the wildflowers, right? But also I love that, you know, you can be anywhere in any sort of ecosystem in California. So if you travel up and down the state, you can see all types of different environments and just enjoy being outside. You know, I can go to the beach or I can stroll through a state park in the mountains and be surrounded by trees all in the same day. So I love that about California. I love that I was born and raised here. So that's kind of what I've known. And when I've lived in other locations, I always fall back on missing that about California.
Thank you. Lisa Braun?
Well, obviously also the wildflowers. It's the thing that I love the most about California, and all the different kinds of landscape. And it's so different from the East Coast. And it's like being transported to a different planet when I leave the East Coast and land in California and travel the coast up and down to see family. I always feel like I've been transported into another world, and I'm always happy to see all the different flowers and wildlife that's blooming that we don't have on the East Coast.
Thank you. Dean?
There's so many things to love about Hawaii, but I think what I love about it most right now is that we're a progressive state that understands that we shouldn't be afraid of teaching kids about acceptance and inclusion, and that kids welcome stories about different types of people. They think they're fascinating. So in a country where there are now states, entire states that are saying you can't even mention the topic of gender in school, and there are other states that are saying parents cannot give their kids the medical care they need, I think it's quite remarkable that Hawaii has done just the opposite and has embraced this type of study and this type of book. And we're really happy to have collaborated with some wonderful teachers at Kamehameha school system that have made an educational guide. And this summer, the state of Hawaii is placing 2 copies of the book in every one of the 294 schools in Hawaii. And it's going to be part of the curriculum. Sorry to choke up like that, but that's why I love Hawaii. Yeah. Joe can probably take it from there.
Go ahead, Joe.
Well, I would just echo that while Hawaii is a very special place for a lot of reasons, and it is an archipelago of islands, for me, what's most magical about it is the ocean. And that is because the power, the life-giving energy, the sense of mystery, and most importantly, the respite and the sense of refuge it offers when one immerses oneself in it. it really is a way to escape the troubles of an often too troubled world. So for me, Hawaii is land, but its water is its magic as well.
Thank you. Chad?
So Idaho for me, and we're actually, I lived in Seattle for 35 years. That's why the little fairy book. Yeah, it's been interesting going from drinking coffee and getting rained on every day, which was okay for a while, to we live in the high desert now. So like my office right here is at 3,000 feet. Instead of 160 days of sun a year, I think we get 220. So that's pretty exciting for me. You know, the people here are very different than in Seattle too. And they're more, you know, Seattle's, even though it's tucked up way in the corner of the country, is pretty progressive and metropolitan area. I like the progressiveness of it. The metropolitan part of it got to be a little much. So anyway, Idaho is a nice break from that with the people and kind of dialing back the intensity a little bit. And there've been a lot of friendly people, very welcoming. Those are some of my favorite things about Idaho. And biking, people are really into biking here. So I've gone from playing basketball to riding a mountain bike we're about 16 miles from the ski area here. And I take the ski lifts up with my mountain bike and ride back down a lot. So that's, I probably shouldn't be doing that at my age, but I'm doing it anyway. Anyway, that's fun. Those are some of the things I love about Idaho.
Thank you. Bonnie?
Yeah, I love Hawaii too. I just wanted to say, I was just there in Oahu and I saw the stones and I was just like, wow, it was just a really special moment for me having read your book. Thank you for making that. And Las Vegas is the ninth island. So, you know, I love Las Vegas too. And we have a large Hawaiian community here and many of them are my friends. But yeah, and like Lisa was saying, you know, the Mojave Desert is my backyard and I love it. I live like very close to the Red Rock Canyon and the Spring Mountains, and my favorite thing to do is explore and hike, and whether it's in the ocean or the desert or, you know, the mountains, that's what I love. That's what feeds my soul. I really love small animals. So I've been doing a lot of studying of Gambel's quails, which are very abundant out here. I have a story on submission actually now that is about them. I have another one that's working on about the antelope ground squirrels, which, you know, are always like our version of the chipmunk. They're very cute. I call them the squirrels with racing stripes. But yeah, there's just so much inspiration everywhere you look, no matter where you're from. And that's how I feel. Like everywhere I go, I find inspiration, and where I'm from is no different.
Thank you. Jonathan?
We live now about 20 minutes from a place called the Trail of Ten Falls, which is this big state park full of amazing waterfalls and swimming holes and things. And Oregon is one of those places like the Seattle area, Washington, where we guard our precious nature moments closely. Like we keep we keep the people who aren't really committed to experiencing that out with our rain and our gloom. But for about 2 or 3 months out of the year, there's no better place in the world. So we're in the good part right now. And I guess the other thing, there's this particular thing on the Oregon coast where I grew up, where at sunset, there's often like a silvery kind of light that engulfs everything. And I've never seen that anywhere else. That's one of my favorite things.
Thank you. Jessica?
Jonathan's making me a little homesick because I'm an Oregonian. born and raised, but I've technically now lived in Seattle, like just barely a little bit longer than I did growing up in Oregon. So I love the Pacific Northwest. I think that this is such a beautiful, special place, and there's so much soul and so much depth in the trees and the mountains. And while I do live in the city, I still feel like the access and the proximity to all of the nature is so special. You might not, get to go like, down to the Olympics, for camping or a hike, but you could drive 10 minutes and go to, a beautiful park that's nearby that you could go on like a walk and see these amazing trees. And it's just, I think that having that infused and layered into the city, it helps keep me feeling like, that in touch with everything that I do love so much. Like there's water, like in all these different directions nearby. There's mountains, I can see different mountains, from just sitting right here, and just having that all around. I think that it can be like a really nice grounding force, but I do miss the Oregon coast horribly. I don't get there nearly enough. It used to be like an hour drive when I lived in Portland, and now it's like a 5-hour drive to get to like a proper coast from here. So that's hard. But other than that, I do love living here.